to tell you about what I read in September. So, as I predicted in my September TBR, reading in September was a bit of a challenge. The month has been full of ups and downs and some emotional things throughout the month that have made my consistency with reading fairly inconsistent. Let's put it that way. So despite that, I've had some reads that have given me a lot to think about and a lot to talk about. So my plan today is to try to get through the books that I read with you without talking your ear off about them. And I actually even had a DNF this month, which, as you may or may not know, I don't have a lot of. So let's get right into it. I finished 2 books for the BookTube Prize, my last 2 books for the BookTube Prize. A Single Thread by Tracey Chevalier and Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine Evaristo. The vlogs about me reading these books will be forthcoming, probably starting next week, or potentially on Saturday I will release one, and then there'll be 2 vlogs and my final thoughts rankings coming up in the next few weeks, so you'll be able to hear me talk about all about those soon. BookTube Prize is announced on Saturday, October 3rd, so that's really exciting. I'm so curious to see which book wins. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my DNF quickly, which was The Conservationist by Nadine Gordimer. And that made me quite sad because that is one of my 1970s project books in which I picked 10 books covering the 1970s decade, and I'm reading through them before I give kind of a final or a first installment video of the 1970s project. And I'm doing that to kind of explore the literature of the 1970s because I think there's something about it that I find really, really compelling. So to give you a bit of a sneak preview of that video, when I started reading The Conservationist by Nadine Gordimer, which is a Booker Prize winner and is set in South Africa during the 1970s, I could not get into this book. So I read about 50 pages and I found it quite dense. I found the language to be a bit too disjointed for me. There was a lot of vernacular that was specific to the landscape of South Africa and the kind of culture, I think, of South Africa that I could not connect with. And it was a chore to read those 50 pages to me. I was not connecting with the content in the book. And it reminded me a lot, actually, of In a Free State by V.S. Naipaul, which I forced myself to read, even though I really did not get along with his writing style. So what I ended up doing was DNFing it. And I feel like, if I would have been in any other time, I probably would have pushed through and finished it just for the sake of the project. But then I realized, you know what, you're doing this completely of your own accord for fun and for enjoyment. And if you don't enjoy the book, just don't read it. So I certainly am not going to stop trying to find South African literature that I'm interested in reading. I just think that that particular book just didn't do it for me. And so that was my DNF. I read a very interesting historical fiction this month called The 12 Rooms of the Nile by Enid Shomer. And this book was about the fictional relationship, an idea of a possible relationship that could have existed between Florence Nightingale and Gustave Flaubert as they were traveling the Nile around the same time during the year 1850. As a travel book, as a log of traveling along the Nile during the Victorian era, on a boat with your servant and your with the whole landscape of pyramids and amazing desert at your disposal. It was very well written in that regard. I really thought that as a travel book, as a book that could transport you from wherever you happen to be to Egypt along the Nile, it did a great job of that. I will say it took me a while to get into it. I think, I'm not exactly sure why. I just found that the first few chapters, I think because it kind of alternates perspective between Gustave Flaubert and his traveling party and Florence Nightingale and her traveling party. I think that juxtaposition at times threw me off a bit because I really wanted mostly Florence Nightingale's perspective, but I grew to appreciate Gustave Flaubert's perspective. And what Shomer did really well in this book was show these two people as individuals who were searching for something. So this is a story about traveling. It's also a story about the journey to find who you're meant to be, because at this time both Florence Nightingale and Gustave Flaubert were kind of floating around in the ether. They didn't really have directions in life. They both experienced rejection. Nightingale from her family in terms of her kind of asserting her identity, meaning she didn't want to be a typical Victorian lady. She didn't want to marry and have children and a family and run a house. She wanted a career. She wanted a purpose in life, and she felt a calling to that purpose. And at that stage in her life, she still hadn't asserted that in her life. She hadn't learned how to assert that part of who she was. Gustave Flaubert is a struggling writer. He's written one book that his friends have said is not very good, and he is also very against getting married and conforming to the traditional roles that a man would have, because he's much more interested in romantic love, sex, and self-indulgence, and he just wants to be able to write and focus on his passions and not have to conform to societal ideas. So I thought that Shomer did a really great job of contrasting Flaubert and Nightingale, but also showing how similar they were and how they would have been kindred spirits in this way if they would have met, and the relationship, that the things that they pulled out of each other. So Gustave Flaubert pulled this kind of body awareness out of Florence Nightingale. Like, she stopped being just, she tried to assert her womanliness, her desirability, her connection with her body through Gustave. And through Florence, Gustave was able to appreciate a woman other than as an object of sexual desire or as an object to be taken care of, kind of the way he would have with his mother and his sister. So there's a lot in there. There's a lot to explore, a lot of interesting themes. And I thought that it was, a really interesting book that made me think about a lot of things. And I think it gives a really interesting perspective on Florence Nightingale's character. I haven't really read much about Gustave Flaubert in real life to know about his true personality, but I feel that, Shomer seems to really have done her research in this book. And so it's a really interesting exploration. So if you're interested in exploring that type of relationship, that fictional ideas relationship, then I would say check out this book. On audio, after I finished A Single Thread by Tracey Chevalier, I read The Skin We're In by Desmond Cole. And this book is about a year in Desmond Cole's life, living in Canada as a Black man, as a journalist, and as an activist. And this book is infuriating in the best way possible, in that it really shows you the systemic racism inherent in Canada. And if you needed to know, if you didn't think that Canada was a racist country with as much systemic discrimination as the United States or any other colonialist power, then you can just read this book and it will disprove that for you. It will shatter that myth for you, which needs to be shattered for everyone, essentially. This book he wrote it in a kind of a journalistic style to a degree, where he goes month to month, and he talks about the cases mostly in Ontario, some in Nova Scotia as well, and in other parts of Canada, but it's a very Ontario and Toronto focused book, which is fine. He talks about immigration and how it is set up against Black people. He talks about the policing system and how it is systemically discriminating against Black people. He talks about historical connotations around, the settling of Nova Scotia from Black loyalists and different aspects like that. He talks about being a Black man himself and experiencing growing up in Canada, where he was the only Black boy in his class. So it is so important, and I am so glad that I read it, despite the fact that it was absolutely infuriating to me that these injustices continue to be perpetuated against Black people in this country. And he is a activist. He works to advocate, and he is unapologetic about that. And that is such a empowering and wonderful message for people to listen to, because there's not enough of that, I believe, in the literature around these issues. People should not be apologetic. You should not be apologetic. You should be everyone should be standing up to change this. It is wrong. And our society needs to collectively come together and read these types of books and see and acknowledge once and for all that Canada is not some amazing multicultural haven that anyone can come to and feel safe. It's just not true. It's just not true. And this book proves it. And so if you need to prove that to yourself, if you're saying, no, Jenny, you're wrong, just read this book, and then we can talk from there. Okay, the next book I finished in September was The End of Days by Jenny Urpenbach, and I read this book as part of the Read More German Books 2020 prompt, and I really enjoyed this. This was also another book that had me thinking. Now, the only criticism I have of this book is that it's completely melancholy, bittersweet, and there's not really anything happy that happens. So if you are not in the mood for something like that, then don't read this book yet. Wait until you can handle a non-happy book. So the premise of this book is so interesting. It is the story of a woman's life. It starts just at the beginning of the 20th century. And what happens is you get a taste of the story, and then she dies. And so you get this little bit of a life. And then in between that chapter and the next chapter, there's a little interlude in which the author takes you on a what if scenario. So what if the mother would have done this? What if the family would have gone this way? What if the politics of this particular situation had changed slightly like this? And then in the preceding chapter, you are taken on the journey as if those things that the author proposed happened, and that the person did, and that the woman did not die in that moment. And so you go through her life like that. This book takes you through World War I in Vienna, and all the restrictions that were going on there. You go into Russia, pre-World War II, and sort of seeing the political aspect going on there, as well as in Germany. And then you come into East Germany under communism and what life was like then. And then you have some post the Berlin Wall falling, and all of that. There's so much in this book. It has a wonderful style. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to say who translated this book. This book was written in German and is translated by, I will put the name here. And so I thought for a translation it was lovely and really interestingly written. It takes a little bit of time to get used to the style and the rhythm because there aren't a lot of descriptions of characters or names of characters. So characters are very vaguely referred to. You just kind of have to get, especially at the beginning, you have the grandmother, the mother, the daughter, people are referred to in that way. So it takes a little bit of time for you to kind of get the rhythm. And then people will be referred to very simply, but in this very descriptive way. So for instance, there was a poet who had cat hair on his sweater and cigarette stains on his teeth. And that was all you knew about him. But those were the two descriptors of this character. And he was not a main character. But I really liked that because it sets you up to create this person based on two details, and the rest of the person is filled in by your own imagination. So I thought that was really interesting. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Like I said, it was pretty melancholy. There's no happy, family moments that happen to kind of pull you through the book. You just stay in that state of melancholy for most of it. But, it's kind of appropriate for the subject matter. So I really did enjoy it. I think I will definitely read more Jenny Urpenbach in future. I think her style is really interesting, and I'm curious to see what she does with other types of subject matter. So that was my reading for September. And it was not a huge volume, but I did have some pretty hefty books to read, both Girl, Woman, Other and The 12 Rooms of the Nile were over 400 pages. So I'm pretty happy that I got through those books. And I hope you had a great reading month in September. And I will be back again soon with another video.